Hi everyone, my name is Greta and I'm a second year war study student at King's College London. I'm originally from Italy and being born and raised and having spent my whole life there, I developed such a deep interest in topics related to migration mainly, but also international conflict and just post-war recovery. So today I want to share my experience writing an article for Arts for Refugees, which is a project that allowed me to explore these issues from a human centered perspective rather than a more strictly academic one, which is what I'm used to at university, writing essays and academic papers. Through this opportunity, I was able to research and write about the Second Libyan Civil War, which is a conflict that is deeply connected to my country, given Italy's historical ties with Libya and its role as a major destination for all the refugees that were fleeing the war. In fact, the ongoing struggles in Libya regard issues of independence, of self determination, and migration, as I said, that continue still today to affect thousands of people, making it an important subject to discuss, in my opinion, to raise awareness for. So, in today's podcast, I would like to walk you through the key aspects of my article and the human impact of the war, and just the importance of focusing and talking about post conflict recovery in general. So, I chose Libya because this country has been affected by instability since the fall of Gaddafi in 2011, who was a dictator for several decades. And after his assassination, the country was left without a strong central government. And the situation then escalated into a full scale war, in a proper civil war, in 2014. So when Libya then became divided between two main rival governments. And the war also saw foreign powers such as Italy, as I was mentioning before, but also other European nations and also the United Arab Emirates and Turkey or Russia, for example, intervene in the conflict. And each state was just supporting different sides for their own strategic and especially economic interest. So, focusing on what they really wanted to gain from this conflict rather than what was happening to the people living there. So, this external involvement is actually a key point, in my opinion, because it actually worsened the conflict, making Libyans feel like their country was no longer in their hands, but it was just controlled by someone else, by some external and foreign actors. So even after the 2020 ceasefire that was internationally agreed, Libya still today remains politically and also socially fragmented and fragile, with many people that are still struggling to rebuild their lives and start a new and better future for them. And one of the main focuses of my article, as I said before, was the impact of the war on migration. In fact, since 2014, thousands of Libyan, in particular young people, have fled the country and they're seeking safety in Europe. And in this case, particularly in Italy, since it's one of the closest countries to Libya. And however, this mass displacement then created some human trafficking networks and overcrowded detention center, as Libya was also seen by many African migrants as the last step before reaching Europe, so a hope for a better future. So this just led to further humanitarian crisis and creating just more harm than good in general. And unfortunately, what I see really often is migration discussed in political terms. So I always read articles about numbers and policies and migrants seen as security threats rather than through the lens of human suffering, that these people that are just putting their lives in danger, including children and women, in the hope, not even being sure, in the hope of a better future for them and the next generations. In fact, I believe that we should always talk about them as individuals with hopes and dreams and a right to dignity, which is what I wanted to focus on and highlight in my article. But however, despite all these challenges, I also found really inspiring some stories of resilience and strength. In fact, while I was researching about Libya, I found out that one of the most interesting aspects of post-conflict is how these young people are working to rebuild their country. And for example, I found this one initiative that I found really interesting, which is called GAFA. That is a multi-vendor online platform that was founded in 2020. So during a very chaotic time, there was both a pandemic going on, the COVID-19 pandemic, and also the war that was working towards the ceasefire and peace agreements. And at this time, the founder was only 27 years old, created this platform to sell essential goods such as food and clothing to people in need in Tripoli and just in Libya, which, in my opinion, proved the point that even in times of crisis, communities can find ways to support each other. So this small businesses initiative, starting from young, hardworking people, show that Libyans are actively shaping their own future and are trying to getting back their country into their hands instead of foreign actors as it was during the civil war. So while international politics is focusing on high level negotiation and diplomatic um, agreements, what truly matters is what happens with the people. So, for example, social media activism, entrepreneurship, and just local efforts are playing such an important and crucial role in post war recovery and demonstrate the power of having such a unified and cohesive community, which is what was really interesting me while I was doing my research. And personally, working on this article just made me reflect more on the broader themes of war and how is that connected to the theme and topic of identity. Because as I said before, as a war studies student, I tend to analyze conflicts very often, but mainly to strategy or geopolitics and just the military aspect of all wars. While this experience with this internship just reminded me of the human element, which unfortunately is often just lost in more strategic and military talks. In fact, I think that war is just not about peace agreements and military operation strategy, which is all really important, but it's also about the people that are actually losing their homes, they're losing their families and their sense of security and self identity, and they're just trying to rebuild that. So I also feel like recently, with the wide use of social media, we're becoming used to seeing videos and pictures every day, thousands of them, and they can also be very graphic about conflicts that are going on and they're happening, and they're just normalizing this. Well, I believe that we should always spend time researching and informing ourselves and never forget that what we see on our phones, it's real people, it's not just videos of 10 seconds. So this is what I really wanted to highlight in my article, the human perspective, the human-centered point of view. And I also realized, writing this article, that the world is really interconnected. For example, what happens in Libya it's not just affecting Libya, but it's affecting Europe and many more countries, from refugee policies to economic ties and vice versa. So this war is just not a Libyan issue. It's an international concern that should require cooperation and not just intervention seeking economic benefit, for example. So, in conclusion, I hope that the readers just take away the fact that the Libyan crisis is far from over and many challenges still remain today and are still there even after 5 years from the ceasefire. From political instability to socio-economic differences and just refugee integration abroad or back in the country. As I talk in my other article, many refugees were forced to flee, they didn't have a choice, they had to leave their country, and they're now torn between staying in Europe in a safe environment and focusing on trauma response, just integrating in their new life that they've built for themselves, or actually come back to Libya to try and help and rebuild their country, but at the cost of losing their safety at the moment. So, on the other side, we also have stories like GAFA, as I was mentioning before. They remind us of hope that actually exists and the fact that local communities are actually the key to rebuilding post conflict society, not just in Libya, but in many more cases. So I hope that through this podcast you have gained a deeper understanding of what is going on in Libya, what happened with the civil war, which is such a complicated and just multifaceted topic that I tried to break down in this podcast, and the human struggles that still persist today, even if the war ended. So if you're interested in learning more or just reading more, I suggest you and highly encourage you to read my article and just follow independent journalists that are covering the region and always engage in discussion about migration, about self identity, and conflict resolution, going deeper than just political talks.